Good morning, everybody. It is great to have everyone with us today for our next Impact Lab. I'm Alex Price. I'm the CEO of Mission Impact Strategies. Not a job, but an absolute passion and a joy to be part of a group of advisors that love what we do. This topic is one that is very near and dear to my heart. It's the power of in-kind giving, making an impact with products, services, and expertise while telling your brand story. Hits home to me because having led corporate philanthropy for four different companies, I think some of the most impactful work that I've ever been a part of was perhaps not on the cash side, but on the in-kind giving side as I look back at at some of the programs and partnerships that I've had. So I personally have seen the power of it, and I'd love to be a part of helping more organizations do more creatively with what they have, and that's what today is all about. Um, let's see here. I'm going to be hoping that everyone is fully caffeinated and ready to interact. We're going to be sharing. I'm going to be introducing one of my dear friends in the philanthropic leadership space. We're going to be going back and forth, unpacking a lot of great case studies, a lot of great personal examples. But we want to hear from you. So please submit your questions throughout the program. We'll absolutely pause for Q&A at the end, but we'd love to take your questions in real time. And if you got an idea or something that doesn't make sense, just chime in. And we want this to be really as practical as possible. So of course, the shameless plug, always a shameless plug. Mission Impact Strategies. We launched about a year and a half ago. We're a group of advisors throughout Florida. We're on a mission to help make change in the community by helping organizations, both companies and nonprofits, greatly amplify their impact and their influence. And we do that through all the skills that we built over decades in the corporate world, in the nonprofit, and in the public sector space, external communications, philanthropy, building coalitions, coaching leaders, and of course our work in environmental sustainability. And again, would love to talk with anyone out there that's at a pivot point in their organization, looking to make big strides, big growth year ahead of you in 2026. We're all about helping organizations, big and small, go to the next level, whatever that means for you. So I do that again with three of my dear friends who I admire. Amy Armstrong, who's actually our chief of staff, who's guiding this presentation today. Andre Bailey, Clayton Lewis Ferrara, who are our impact strategists, brilliant gentlemen who have just done incredible things in their philanthropic journeys. And I'd love to introduce you to them. And let's get down to it. We don't like to waste any time in these impact labs, and I've been excited about this for about 16 years. um, and so one of my dear friends, Kelly Vitale, is when I moved from New York City to South Florida almost 16 years ago, one of the first people that I ever met. I wanted to get plugged in to the South Florida kind of scene, community involvement, and everyone said, "Well, there's one person that you can meet, that you can meet 100 people or just meet one person who will just plug you into everything." And that person was Kelly Vitale. She at the time was working in the nonprofit space. She's since launched something amazing that she's been leading for many years. I don't want to steal your thunder. I would love Kelly to just sing your praises forever, but I could get a detail wrong, and I wouldn't want that. Uh, Welcome, Kelly Vitale, one of the true leadership community gems of Florida. Kelly,
You're
thank you
so
for being with us
sweet.
today.
Thank you, Alex, for being for having me, and it's so great to be here and to be part of this with you. So, hi everybody, Kelly Alvarez Vitale. I am the president and founder of Strategic Philanthropy. As Alex said, I was in the nonprofit world for 7 years, and when you're entering that world, I after a stint, I knew that, I wanted community relations to be my next role. But we all know that that's the job that no one really retires from, and you kind of just have to wait your turn to get the call. So, my husband was in banking at that time, and they didn't have a designated community relations person. And so he would oftentimes get a lot of the sponsorships requests and so forth, and people would just ask him to like run it through the chain of command. And one day he just said, like, why don't you do this? I was like, do what? He's like, why don't you, do outsource community relations? And I was like, that is the dumbest idea of all time. Who's going to hire me to do that? And I literally walked away from making our bed. I came back a week later and I said, okay, like what would that look like? And he said, I'll help you with the finances, but you have to kind of go and do the work. And so I would go to coffee shops and bought a book on Amazon called How to Start a Business, and really created a business plan. I mean, this is somebody who had not gone to business school or anything along those lines, but did know the philanthropy world. So ultimately, our company, Strategic Philanthropy, we get hired by companies, foundations, or government agencies to give away their money to nonprofits, which is pretty sweet. Ultimately, these companies or organizations have a bucket of money to give, but really just can't justify the full, to have a full-time person. So we can offer them the feel of having a full-time community relations or corporate philanthropy, community impact team at a fraction of the cost of having a full-time person. And here we are 15 years later, I'm still doing it.
15 years later, I mean, it feels like 15 months ago to me. I remember when you made the
I
move,
still look the
and I was
same.
like,
Yes, yeah, totally.
you do look the same, absolutely look the same. But I remember being impressed with just how bold it was. It was against the grain. It was against the and and you tapped into something to a real need. We have so many organizations in that space. I know you have kind of a sweet spot, I think, in terms of size of company who care about the community, who have a heart to give, but understand that there's an art and a science to doing that strategically. And and they need to have
Yeah,
an expert to do that, to make good on their investment, big or small. And you tapped into something, a true need that was there, and you were
yeah.
the perfect person.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Oh,
Opportunity
I
to
see
really
Kelly.
look.
You had
Am I
froze
on?
for a second, but you're back. You're back.
Oh, my
It's great.
bad. Okay, great. I was gonna say, yeah, when you look at your resume, it's, you've had the great gift and opportunity to really work for, some massive, large Fortune 500 companies and some massive, organizations in South Florida. We always say about South Florida, it's a very generous, very prosperous community, but, really you're looking at companies, the bulk of Florida is made up of 50 million to 250 million, which it's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for a company to be getting, but that's really considered a mid-sized company. That's not a Fortune 500. That's not a top 100 company. And so these companies, very prosperous, very giving, but just really can't justify having that full-time person. And so that's kind of where we can kind of come in and help build that strategy and give them the feel of, what it would be like to have an Alex Price on their team, at an ADT or a Comcast or a Burlington and so forth, but, at a scaled down version that really fits their business model.
Well, and it's interesting being, like you in philanthropy in South Florida now for almost 2 decades. You know, we know about the personal wealth and the family foundations and just how the huge opportunity that they have because of just the size and scope of their assets to make a difference philanthropically. And we know that just how important that segment is, which I think is an interesting sort of pivot over to our topic today, in kind, because companies have cash, sometimes in limited, well, always in some limited amount. And
Yeah.
it's never as much as they would like to give, for sure, because they have so many other considerations. But they have so many other assets outside of cash. And of course, that catch-all phrase "in kind," there's a lot in that phrase. And I remember hearing, some people think of that probably as one thing, but there's a lot packed into that term. And I think before we get into sharing some of these case studies and best
Yeah.
practices, maybe we should, because people might have different definitions in our audience. Kelly, could you kind of maybe unpack and define terms?
Yeah.
What are we talking about? In
Yeah.
kind. What
Yeah,
is it?
so I often say, we will often hear from nonprofits, obviously cash is king, right? But in kind also has a monetary value to bring to nonprofits. So, what is in kind? So that can be a good that's a physical good. So a product that you might sell that you can assist a nonprofit with. Some companies have facilities, a lot of space to host events or meetings or conferences to nonprofits. Maybe you do printing that you can do invitations or programs for a nonprofit. You can, maybe you're in the event planning space that you can assist a nonprofit in planning one of their many events. Maybe you're in the service industry. Maybe you are in HR or accounting, or you do leadership training or consulting or packaging, marketing, logistics, you can take that skill set of what, that service that you are really, really good at your job and offer it to a nonprofit. That is an in-kind service. We always tell people, look at your company, see what it does really, really well. And how can you really incorporate that into your philanthropy strategy? I know we're going to talk about, some examples, later on, but, there's a really easy example. Somebody might say, well, we don't really do a lot, but we have a lot of people that work at our company. I often say, manpower, woman power, however you define it these days. Sometimes just having a large employee base can really work in your favor. And when you have disaster relief efforts, whether hurricanes or tornadoes or wherever it is that you're living, sometimes people can be the best resources to offer, to really volunteer and kind of that has a value. So again, I know that we'll talk a little bit more um, about that, but the point of today's call is to say that not all sponsorships have to be about cash. It's really saying, hey, you can offer a product or service and that has value. And when you donate it to a nonprofit, and that can be part of your philanthropic story.
No, and that's brilliant. So we're talking about it really is anything but cash. And
Anything
so
but
just
cash.
think,
Yeah.
and and so companies have so many assets, and probably sitting on things that they never realized could be a benefit to the community. So we hope that for those that are working in the for-profit sector with us, that this gets your ideas and your juices flowing about what sort of you can look at your company a little bit differently and maybe find new ways to support the community that can complement your cash giving. We know a lot of our audience are nonprofit leaders, and so kind of on the flip side, this will hopefully give you can look at your corporate partners a little bit different and think, okay, what are some other ways we could maybe encourage or we could sort of kind of pique their curiosity of other ways that they could help them as a nonprofit and the nonprofit community in general. So this is for both audiences. And one kind of clarifying thing that I think is interesting, you know, with in kind, it can be a company giving what it sells, a product or service, and giving that philanthropically. And sometimes it's more one-off and it's more just kind of something that it might just have. I always joke about an interesting example, when I was at Office Depot would be, we would do things that were strategic, that were scalable from backpack programs, um, things that we could operationalize around the country. And then sometimes it was, hey, Alex, we have 10,000 glue sticks that didn't go sold. Is there a preschool that might be able to use that? So sometimes it's that kind of glorified one-off that can be super impactful for a nonprofit organization, but not something you can operationalize. So both are relevant. I think both are part of this conversation. So we want to kind of go to
Oh,
this next
I was
portion.
I was
Yeah.
gonna just say one other point to that, Alex. I was gonna say too, it's an also easy way, if you're trying to get into a corporation, and you don't necessarily have the best relationship with them or don't know how to get in, to always have that first meeting and it be about cash when you don't necessarily have a relationship with them. It's a little jarring sometimes. And so it's just an easier sell sometimes if you can kind of position yourself to be like, hey, if cash isn't an opportunity, could we go this in-kind route? And then once you can go in there and prove yourself as a nonprofit and build that relationship and steward that donor, then you can continue to have those conversations about cash later on. But it's an easy entry point, I think, than just, always leading with cash.
Oh, I thank you for that. That's a huge insight. I know that sitting on the other side of the table for many, many years, when a nonprofit makes that request and shows their genuine interest in what you sell, I mean, it is gratifying to a corporate partner because remember, that's their world. That's what they're living and
Right.
breathing every day. And so when they indicate that that would be useful, that they can
Yeah.
be really a brand ambassador, that their product and service would make a difference for the population that they serve, that they would love to showcase that and spotlight that and be proud of that and to help tell your story. It's kind of double attractiveness there. So I think you're right. It is a great relationship building entree. and in addition to it being high impact. So Kelly, in our kind of prep meetings, we talked about all the great things that are happening around the globe and around the country in
Yeah,
terms of companies big and small, like really like changing the world
right.
with their in-kind giving. And and there's so many examples, and we went through, we couldn't go through all of them, but you and I picked out three that we thought, hey, these are really cool, well-known companies. They are doing something game changing with their in-kind giving, and there's a lot of learnings in there. And so, if you're okay, I thought we'd just kind of go through each one and really kind of unpack what makes them powerful and creative, and then what we can all learn from them. Um, because the Airbnb.org example to me is just a classic example of a company looking at their what they do, a core the core thing that they do, which is of course a network of lodging across the globe, and how lodging can be exactly what a person or a family in need would need at a time of crisis, and how they could create a scalable program around that. And I know you and I read a little bit about
Yeah.
that, and you were particularly intrigued by it.
Yeah.
Share a little bit
No,
about this
I think this
program,
is fascinating. So, I mean, they're looking at their core business, right? And they're saying,
right?
hey, we have rooms, we have space. This is something, and granted, they don't own the space, ironically, right? So
Right,
it's
right.
not a typical hotel. It's not a typical venue, right? These are the homes or the second homes of individuals, but they would devise a program to say, hey, if you are willing to donate your home or offer it at a discounted rate for someone who is under, during a major catastrophic event, and they don't have a home, they're looking for relief. They are, an asylum seeker, a refugee, because again, different wars or whatever. That if you do this, you will kind of get credit for it. You get this like badge and so forth as part of, as an Airbnb host. And so, we are in a society right now where we love gaming and badges and awards and recognitions and so forth. And so if this aligns with your core values, so you are a host family and volunteerism and giving back is something that is important to you, this is a way that they're saying they're meeting their I was going to say their constituents, but they're meeting, the people who are their partners where they're at. Not everyone's going to donate their home, right? But for those that this is really important, and they say, hey, how can I help during this, massive crisis that's happening in my community or around the world, that they're giving people the opportunity to do so. And so it gives people who are looking for an outlet an opportunity to give back. And so many times I coach my clients to say, when people are like, oh, well, just let people volunteer. I'm like, yes, people want to volunteer, but there's so much on their plate. There's so much to do if you're working or if you have family or if you have kids and responsibilities and whatever it is that it's on your plate. If we, the company, can build the system for them, plan it, organize it, make it easy, where all they have to do is just show up, then they're going to come. But if they have to plan it and find it and do it, they're not going to do it. They're not going to make their service hours. They're not going to volunteer. So if you can make it easy for them, people will raise their hand, people will show up, but you have to do it.
And I love that, and it's always important, and we're going to talk about this further, for the company in the in-kind giving to find the right community partners to
Right.
operationalize, right? Because not every gift is relevant to every nonprofit partner, or they may not be able to operationally handle the donation because of the size and scope. And I know in one case that was really, really powerful was, I think it was during one of the recent LA area
Yeah.
wildfires. I want to say it was last year. And so they smartly partnered with the local 211. So people are all over the greater LA area are calling in the 211. I have this need, I have this need. Many of that is, I've lost my home, or at least
Right.
for a time, I've lost my home. And they were able to
Right.
directly patch them into this Airbnb.org operation to place people in homes that have been opened up. And I was like, wow, that what a great way. They also stayed in their lane to know, hey, we're good at this, but we're
Yeah.
going to need to have the right nonprofit partners
Right.
to find people in
To
need that
match.
were
Right.
right, that's vetted.
Right.
There's always worry that someone might
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
seeking support, but you don't really have the need. But
Right.
leave that to the experts,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. for sure.
So Starbucks though, I have a really bad
Yeah, I mean,
Starbucks habit.
yeah,
So I
so I love this too because I think especially now in this time, I just read an article this morning that the SNAP benefits are going to end come November 1st. And so a lot of
yeah,
our food banks are going to be really taxed with, individuals that, are going to need assistance and so forth. So you have these big companies who have excess food. When you go to a Starbucks, at the end of the day, if that food is not sold, you as the customer do not want it the next day. You want a fresh baked good. That doesn't mean and that the muffin's not good, that your egg and cheese, great little container is not good. It could probably last for another several days. Um, and so what they're saying is that at the end of every night, they take anything that has not been sold. They work with Feeding South, or not, I was gonna say Feeding South Florida, it's actually Feeding for America. And they kind of get and they distribute all their leftover food to their food centers to make sure that the food doesn't go to waste. I mean, food waste is a massive issue in this country.
huge.
Where just food just gets thrown away constantly, and it's great food that people could be eating, and there are people in need. And so Starbucks said, okay, we can kind of retool this, and they can measure, how many pounds, how many pallets, how much are we doing, and they can get the tax write-off for it, because they're measuring it. And that's a really key component of this particular program. But I love that they kind of said, the easy choice is to throw it away. The right choice is to donate it. And so I love that
Right.
program.
Right. In that case, again, it's a double bottom line of, hey, this is a sustainability win.
Yeah.
It's a community giving win. So it's not going to a landfill. It's not going to, the
Yeah.
dumpster. It's going. And what made me think about it is, okay, so they're Starbucks. They're this, just behemoth.
Right.
But so what does that mean to the local restaurants, the regional restaurant? And I think there's so much that can be learned. I can tell you, and you've probably been in this situation, how many times I've been at like, a community event where there's just so much uneaten pizza they over ordered, or all the hors d'oeuvre trays are still, no one's really touched them, and they're like, hey, Alex, can you find someone real quick that we can give this to?
Right.
And of course you do, you scramble, but you're like, hey, if this is something that's going to happen with some regularity, we need a process around it. Of
Totally.
course, no one does process better than Starbucks. So they have it at every single US store is partnered with their local Feeding America food bank, and they have a turnkey process. And I was like, well, any restaurant or any organization in the food or beverage industry can find a vetted nonprofit or nonprofits locally that would love to be able to put that donated food to good use, can do it quickly before it spoils, but to do your work in advance so that you're not scrambling, so you have a
Yeah.
repeatable process. And again, where you're partnered with an organization that truly does want that, that wouldn't, a lot of times,
Yeah.
and the secret is that nonprofits don't want to seem ungrateful, right? I mean, of
Right.
course, none of us do. So it's kind of it's tough to say no sometimes, but sometimes
Yeah.
you do need to say no with some
Right.
of these donation opportunities because of the fact that you might not be able to put it to good use. It might not be a right fit. I'm sure
Right.
you've seen stuff like that where it just the right
Right.
answer is sometimes yes and sometimes it's no.
Right. And again, I think having a system in place, having a good partner, it's not these one-offs. It's saying, hey, every night, this is the plan. And then, and again, we'll talk about this later, it's being measured. Not only measured so that you can tell your story to your internal stakeholders, your external stakeholders. So whether that's, the public or your board or your employees or whatnot, but you can then, you're measuring impact and you can really see, where you're how you're moving the needle. And that's really important in the process, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think about it in the case of Starbucks, we're talking about their ready-made, prepackaged meals where, you know, the end recipient, the individual, the family in
Yeah.
need is getting a high quality, right? High quality. In
Right.
this case, for Starbucks' purposes, it is a well-packaged, branded meal. And so it's an
Okay.
opportunity to connect with the community in a way where they do know where the generosity came
Yeah.
from. It is high quality. It's not something that would normally go away. It's something that would be normally sold. And so it's something that the company would be really proud of.
Yeah.
And I think that's an
Right.
important litmus test as well.
Absolutely.
So I know you were really passionate about us including the Salesforce
I
pro bono
was because
example.
Yeah,
right?
I was because the other two, Airbnb and Starbucks have a a quote unquote tangible product, right? It's like, oh,
Right,
it's rooms, oh, it's food. And what I want to
right.
make sure that individuals hear on this is that, I talked earlier about manpower, woman power, or employee power, right? Um, and this is what Salesforce does. Salesforce has a team of very smart, of smart, brilliant people who are beyond capable, right? And they can use their skill set, their brilliance to say, hey, our team can really help your organization with HR or with leadership consulting or with this type of training. And so they're using the skill set of their employees to train a nonprofit however best they need. So this is just an out of the box way of thinking what in kind can be. It doesn't always have to be a physical product. It can be a service and kind of looking through what it is that your company does really well. And sometimes what your company does really well can very easily be the service that you provide, or it can be your employee base, and really kind of thinking through what they can offer as well.
And of course, every organization has really bright people that can help a nonprofit. Salesforce is, I mean, that's the reputation, right? It's
Right.
brilliant people who are going to make your organization better. So doing that is another platform to showcase it philanthropically. And I think about again times at big companies where I would go around and kind of audit, the department. Okay, we have
Yeah.
lawyers in the legal department.
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
provide pro bono? We've got
Yeah.
you know, all organizations in the nonprofit space want to market themselves, brand themselves better, communicate externally better. Well, you know, how
Yeah.
much fun for a corporate marketing or PR person to be able to lead a workshop or create a strategy or help implement a strategy at a great nonprofit. And that's something that can be valued and it's tremendously valuable. But again,
Yeah.
showcasing skills in a way that the company is very proud to have people know, hey, not only are they philanthropic, but they got a lot
Yeah.
of brilliant people there. Not a bad place to work.
Yeah, and there was, I mean, many, many years ago when I started, I saw a wonderful presentation. Her name is Bee Buckalander, if I'm saying her last name right. And she was just saying, for the test of time, we have been told, two things. One is that you could go into the corporate sector and not have purpose, but make a lot of money, right? Or you could go into the nonprofit sector and have a lot of purpose, but not make a lot of money. And
Right.
so, when you're looking at corporate volunteerism in general, you're trying to find this intersection where, yes, people are working in the corporate world, but you're finding an opportunity for them to give back so that they feel like they also have purpose because we always say in our household you can be more than one thing. You don't just have to be this one-dimensional person. You can go and make money, but you can also have a heart and have purpose and so forth. So I think, using your employee base who have the skill set, and again, for those who want it, for those who want the opportunity to give back, to align themselves with a charity that really speaks to them and offering their skill set. I just think it's a really great easy way to kind of have an in-kind donation that is just not a traditional product.
And, during my time at Deloitte,
Mm.
of course, those professional services companies are all about just the brain power
Yeah,
capacity of the
yeah,
people. That is
yeah,
that
yeah,
is the product. That is the service. And so you could sign up for a pro bono assignment. And it
yeah,
was something that was considered like it was very honored in that corporate culture. It was considered a very prestigious thing to be allowed and offered to do. And what I loved about it, from what we've researched in Salesforce, I mean, these are not willy-nilly, these are not sort of thrown together projects, but they're treated with the same sort of structure and professionalism as what they sell. And they say, hey, we're going
right,
to put in 20, 50, 100 hours with you. At the end of that 100 hours of service,
right.
you're going to get these deliverables, A, B, and C, super buttoned up, super measurable, whether it was a successful engagement or not. And I just loved how it was treated really no different than what they
Yeah,
sell in terms of how serious they took it.
yeah, love
And,
that.
and I think that that's really important. Looking at these big examples, I know we said, hey, we want to make sure that what we talk about today is just crazy practical for everyone. And so we what we did is we looked at these case studies. We looked at probably about 10 in all. and said, hey, what are the learnings here that would apply whether you are a big or small company who's doing this now or not, or a nonprofit that wants to, again, that wants to sort of spark the interest of your partners to do more of this. And and so these are just some ways that we thought, hey, let's pull out some of the learnings and talk about how you can adapt sort of the kind of things that we've just been talking about with these big global companies for any regional, local company. And I think it all starts with the question that the person in the company, which is, what do we have at scale that's maybe underutilized, that's maybe not fully utilized, that could be opened up to the community, to nonprofits that are in need? Like, what do you have? And just a few examples there, your physical space, maybe your technology platform, your logistics capabilities, all your workforce, as much as goods and services. I mean, don't you think that's probably the first step is for a company to say, hey, like let's think creative here. Let's get the whiteboard and let's list out all the different things we have.
Yeah, what for sure. I was gonna give an example. I had an educational institution client for many, many years, and yes, they gave cash, but the cash was limited, and so we kind of did that same exercise. We kind of sat back and said, okay, what else could we give to the community? And so because it was an education institution, we had a lot of space, and so we would host tons of meetings and conferences for our nonprofit partners. Because we would have exhibits and speakers and things along those lines. We would offer free tickets to events if people wanted that as like raffle auction or items. We had a marketing department that would do a lot of designing and printing for either programs or big pamphlets or books like books annual booklets or things along those lines. And we had like a ropes course as well that we would kind of offer at a discounted rate. So again, we kind of looked at it holistically and said, okay, what else? Our cash isn't going to be like the big players, but how else can we really intertwine ourselves into the community and really give back? And we tracked it. And what we were able to do at that point was, in addition to our cash, because we measured it, we were able to give several hundreds of thousands of dollars each year in-kind donations because we kind of put that on the whiteboard and said, how else can we give?
It's huge, right? I mean, that's annual
Right.
report
Yeah.
level level stuff right there. It's got
Yeah.
real teeth. It is, I mean, the scope of it, like that's really significant. And that didn't exist until you had
Yeah,
that conversation,
for
which I
sure.
think is pretty awesome. My last two corporate stops were retailers, so physical products, national chains. So you had massive inventories. And of course, you don't sell everything that you merchandise. In fact, there's a lot that you don't sell. And so the question is, okay, how can you sort of organize from, remember, you got logistics systems, you got warehousing everywhere, and then how can you evaluate
Yeah.
what is givable? And what I think is really neat is when nonprofits would come and pitch us, kind of to your point, not cash, and say, hey, um, in this case, Burlington, hey, we have a nonprofit. We help young boys coming out of high school or college get their first job, first interview clothing. You all have suits for youth and whatnot. Do you like, is that something that we can do? One example I was going to wait, but I'll just share it, which I thought was really neat was, okay, we're like, yes, we do. We also want to create a relationship with these young men and become a place where they love to shop. So we would be able to open the store like an hour
Right.
early, pick the store, have a dedicated sort of white glove treatment hour where we would walk in and shop with these young gentlemen, get them outfitted for their first,
Love that.
interview attire. It was wonderful for associates because those were frontline associates that got to be involved with that philanthropic endeavor. And it
Yeah.
wasn't cash. They took more pride in the fact that what they sell every day was making a youth dreams come true, which was
Right.
infinitely more meaningful than them being the ones to hand a check, taking pride in like,
Right.
wow, our assortment is what's going to help
Yeah.
this is going to be a part of helping this youth kind of be on track for a great future. And again, when you have product at a certain scale, that can be easy. But I think that's something that any organization that is in the retailers in the world of selling stuff can find an organization or organizations where that can be game changing. But finding the right organization, which is the next thing, kind of mapping, whatever asset that you identified, mapping that to a community need, and then finding partners. I mean, you're in the business of structuring great partnerships on the cash side, but also talk a little bit about sort of right fit
Yeah,
with
I had a medical device company I worked with for a long time. And so, two things about that company. One was that they gave a little bit of cash. And when we kind of did a financial assessment of all of their giving, because it was coming from all different sorts of departments, I remember meeting with my key contact at that point, and they said, we don't really know why the CEO hired you. And I said, okay, well, let me just kind of do the financial assessment and we'll kind of do it. And when we pulled the financial assessments of, all this, anything that was given to like a charity, because it was coming from so many different departments and it wasn't streamlined, we realized that their in-kind giving was over $250,000 and they had no clue, right? So that's crazy, right? And so all of a sudden we looked
quarter
at, okay,
million. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
quarter
big.
million,
It's
but
big.
had no clue
It's
because it was
really,
coming from
really
different
big.
departments. And so, we kind of said, okay, this now needs to be streamlined and we need to be very thoughtful on the type of organizations that we're giving this to. So we kind of said, where do you want to grow? What are the markets that you want to grow? What are the type of individuals that you want to serve? Where, do you want to keep yourself in South Florida? Do you, there's certain places in the United States, they had a distribution in, they were trying to grow in Europe. And so really finding the best relief organizations that could quickly get, we could give away we could give our products to them at the end of each quarter. And then they would be able to take these products that, either had a certain shelf life or whatever, but ensure that they were going to get used in the communities that they were going to serve. So finding those right partners was absolutely instrumental, versus the product just sitting in a warehouse for 2 years and never being used. So yeah, that's absolutely key.
Yeah, it's funny. And kind of a funny example would be so during my Office Depot days, I would occasionally get a call that would say, "Hey, we have a semi truck, like a semi truck, an 18 wheeler full of um, an unidentified assortment of school relevant products." And that would be the information that I would get. And in this certain region of the United States, this is stuff that we can't sell, or it actually would cost us too much money logistically to get it to a point of selling. We just need to we need to donate it. We need to donate it fast. Just find us a school or a school district. And what I realized was that could be a blessing or a curse depending on the partner. And no one really wants to turn down a semi truck full of stuff. But you
Right.
can imagine if you're a school or a small nonprofit or even a large organization that doesn't have the storage or the manpower to sort through something like that,
Right.
that it really was um, that was only as good as finding a partner that could
Correct.
handle the donation, that had warehousing, that had staff to be able to evaluate, hey, probably one half of what's in this truck is going to be worth like irrelevant to us, and we're going to have to find time to donate it out. And so
Right.
it reminded me of like that was an extreme example of how
Yeah.
finding the
Yeah.
right partner, not only where the product or service or whatever is being given is relevant to what they do,
Yeah.
but but can they meaningfully handle it? Is it going to be more burdensome than helpful?
Yeah.
And I think that
100%.
that's really, really important. Um, the next thing here was kind of building process around these things, um, which is really important if you want to do something repeatable and sustainable. Um, and having, you know, and I think that Kelly, this reminds me of just thinking of our nonprofit audience who's probably thinking, okay, so how can I use this information maybe to have a deeper relationship with some corporate partners? And I don't think it's one size fits all. It's probably looking to say, okay, what do we need? What do we need really? And what
Right.
organizations maybe in our region could provide that? And how can we make it really easy for them to do? Can we help them operationalize something? Can we help said company programatize something for them, and where it can be a storytelling engine. It just made me think it's just kind of not part of our planning and stuff, but just how a nonprofit can be, um, assertive and more intentional, approaching an organization, not just for a
Yeah,
one-off, but for a
yeah, I think
continuous
it's more.
relationship.
Yeah, I think it's more learning, making sure that that nonprofit has the best understanding that they can about what that corporate partner does and the ins and outs. And then, I always say if anybody can make someone else's job easier, like, yes, like let's work together. If you're making the job harder, nobody wants to work with you. But if you can make the job easier, so if you can kind of get that understanding from your, the corporate philanthropy rep or whoever that it is that you're working with at the company, and then you as the nonprofit come in and say, hey, well, this is how we operate. If we can piggyback here and do X, Y, and Z, and you come with the plan and I always say the SOP, the standard operating procedures, like build it out versus having me have to build it out. Like, okay, now like there's a template in place. Now we can edit, we can tweak, and I don't have to do all this work. That just takes a lot off the plate. And now all of a sudden we're 10 steps ahead of the game versus having to start on step one. That's a great point.
Well, I think the SOP part is really important because that's how companies operate. You're speaking their
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
and you can show a CFO that by doing this, it's going to be a sustainable thing for them to do over time,
Yeah.
versus something that sounds, everything is in this space is pretty
Yeah.
well intentioned, right? But
Yeah.
there can be when I think about, an interesting example that I'd share with you is my time at ADT, one of the world's leaders in physical security. And the idea was to donate, on some level, security systems to nonprofits, or, for instance, homes, Habitat for Humanity homes that we might
Yeah.
have had a hand in helping to build. But it became really complex because to install a system costs thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
to send someone out to do that, and then you've got a service attached to that has a monthly value, and it could go on in perpetuity. So we really had to look at that and say, okay, is this something that, as a for-profit company, that we could sustainably do at scale over time, or in this case, is it something that we can do occasionally in special
Right.
moments?
Right.
And I think
Right.
there's definitely that distinction. I remember, you've said in that you've had some conversations with your client CFOs over time, where again they're looking at it through, okay, but what
Yeah.
is this going to have some unintended consequences
Yeah.
to the bottom line that we need to prepare for?
Yeah, so again, let's just give some context. So, when Alex and I were debriefing or pre-briefing before this call, we were just saying, a lot of times, because we work with, I get to work with these medium-sized companies or these municipalities, and sometimes these private foundations. Private foundations, you have a lot more flexibility in the sense of, look, if a family, if you're in a private family foundation and that family or that particular donor wants to support a really small initiative because it's really impactful and it's really meaningful, even though it might not serve the masses, that's fine because that donor has the capacity and the means to do so. And that is what the donor ultimately wants. When you're working with corporations, when you're working with corporation, it is all about the bottom line. They see everything, when they invest in a new accounting software or HR software, whatever that software is, they're expecting it to have some sort of return on investment, and that they're going to be better, faster, more efficient, right? And so ultimately they see philanthropy as a line item in the budget, right? And so our tagline at our company is, we believe that you should do good in the community, but we also believe that you should do well. And that's really why it's so important to make sure that your philanthropy is tied into your business goals and objectives, because it shouldn't just be this one off. It should really figure out how philanthropy can help bridge a gap to help you achieve some of those goals. But yes, it is ultimately a bottom line item. And so you have to make the case to your CFO or your CEO or whoever it is that you're dealing with, that when you are implementing these programs, that when there are costs associated with them, that it ultimately does the company a service versus a disservice, and the same for municipalities. These are taxpayer dollars,
Oh my goodness.
that we have to
Yes.
be very mindful of and ensure that we know that where every dollar's going, and because we have to stand in front of a commission and make sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed because these are taxpayer dollars. And so we have to be very mindful on as to the types of programs and the types of expenses and things that we're able to approve, because it ultimately it's not our money. It's, it's the money of the people that we're just trying to steward in a way that really aligns with that municipality and what they're trying to achieve as well.
No, you're right. And it just shows that there's the same level of sophistication philanthropically can be and should be applied to the in-kind space to get the return that you want. These last 3 points, I'll kind of mash them up
Sure.
together. They're really about telling a powerful story. And I am of the belief that there may be no more powerful way to tell a brand story than through really strategic in-kind giving at scale. Because you are, especially when you're leveraging something that is core to who you are, the story you want to tell anyway. So I think the magic happens when you've got greater brand alignment with what you're giving, who you're giving it to, um, and then telling the story both from a quantitative standpoint, making sure that you measure the impact. And again, when you do, it really is impressive when you said when you start pulling and really aggregating these things, it can be, the hundreds of thousands or even millions. And then capturing the human story. I was looking at some of those examples, those best practice examples. And when you hear a story, it's great to see the inventory that, say, Airbnb is donating out to victims of disaster. But
Right.
when you hear one family who was displaced because their home was lost in a fire, and how that really came in as a saving grace for that family in that time of utter crisis. I
Yeah.
mean, that is arguably more powerful than any sort of cash philanthropic story you could ever tell.
Yeah.
Um, it has the capability of being incredibly powerful. Um, I'm going to take down the presentation here. Let's see here. Are we um, stopping sharing? So now you can just look at me and Kelly.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and just to spend some time as questions come in, and Amy, let us know if there are any questions that are in now. We'll pause, but until we do, just to kind of share some other just you know personal examples. We've been in this philanthropic space for a long time. I want to start with one, if I could, from my days at Comcast. Comcast was in a very different space, right? It's a internet provider, cable provider, and there was a lot of inventory on the airwaves. And I thought about how, advertising and marketing yourself from a broadcast standpoint is incredibly expensive and outside the reach of many nonprofits, and how valuable that was. And we had a program there where we would donate the time of editing and shooting a PSA for a
Mhm.
nonprofit, whether it's hunger relief or disaster relief, creating a great 30-second piece, which we could
Yeah.
do really quickly with the talent. And then we could look at the inventory and say, okay, let's donate, you know, 5% of our airtime
Right.
to these nonprofit partners and give them an opportunity that would be far outside of their budget by advertising, whether it be their big
Right.
annual event or
Yeah.
just the organization in general or a big drive that they're doing. And that is one of my, and I didn't, I got to run that program. I didn't create that program. I thought that was one of the most unique and valuable ways of using what they had, which almost no one else has, to help an organization in ways they could never justify paying for on their own.
Right.
It was
Right.
like I thought that was a special example, and it was something again you could value in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in sort of
Right.
fair market value. Um,
Yeah.
what's an example? What's another example, sort of from your career, or just things that you've heard that have been sort of maybe out of the box or particularly unique in kind?
Um, Something that has been a little bit more unique. I'm trying to think of um, oh, so one of my clients, we developed, it kind of ties into the Salesforce example, but one of my clients had a huge employee base of experts, right? And so we developed a speakers bureau for them. And so that, nonprofits would kind of reach out to this client and say, hey, we're doing this conference on sustainability. We're doing this meeting on leadership development. We're doing this conference on, I don't know, whatever, this political debate series or whatever. Do you have a speaker that could potentially, moderate this or be a keynote or whatnot. And so we would kind of run through 2,500 names and people who would kind of had raised their hands to say like they would be willing to kind of go out into the community and speak on whatever their expertise was. And so we had this massive database with keywords and so forth that we would kind of peruse to say, okay, Alex Price, he can speak on X, Y, and Z. And so we would, we'd say, okay, these are the 5 people. We would kind of reach out to them and say, hey, here's this opportunity, date, time, etc. Would you be available? And we'd kind of, whittle it down to see who was. And so that was a way for in kind that we were able to say, okay, so now Alex is going to go out and do this event for an hour or 2 hours. We would know what the average volunteer rate was for an executive or somebody along with a very similar title, and that had a value, and that ultimately became part of our in-kind story, of like, hey, this is how much impact we're kind of having in the community. So that's something that we did as well, to just, again, it's just different ways to look at what you currently have as an employer, and then like retooling it and saying, how can you kind of give back to the community?
And then when you put great structure, I mean the programatizing it, it's really neat to do that one off here and there. It's super, and that's super
Yeah,
great. But to make something repeatable, something that a community can access easily, you had to
yeah,
put that rigor around it,
yeah,
which then enabled it to make a really big impact. And I
yeah.
think that to me that's so key. But go ahead, yeah.
The other thing, I just want to circle back when you were talking about the storytelling on the last slide. I didn't get a chance to say this, but I do want to kind of just circle back on it. Um, I want to say how important it is to storytell, and a lot of times, corporations, or at least my clients, and or some municipalities don't want to do the storytelling. Ironically, it's like, no, we don't want to let people know like what we do in the community. And it's like, no, 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 that's the whole point, because you don't know when the messaging is going to stick, when it's going to resonate. And again, and it's not just to the outside public. You are looking at your internal stakeholders as well. And sometimes those internal stakeholders are your employees. And when you're looking at a generation, so you can, if you're really looking at millennials, and then you're looking at Gen Z, and then you're looking at, potentially whatever Gen Alpha, whatever they're calling them these days, of people that, volunteering and giving back is kind of just been ingrained in their culture. That's how you get to college. You have to have a certain number of service hours. Like, it's just part of who they are. Telling those stories of how you're giving back is so important, not just publicly, but internally as well. So I don't think people tell the story enough, in my personal opinion. And so I think it's a missed opportunity.
I've been a part of all those internal conversations of, is
Yeah.
this going to be too self-serving? Is this going to come
Yeah.
off in a way that's not really going to feel right? And I've almost always been surprised that the nonprofit oftentimes really, really benefits from the spotlight in ways maybe even beyond what the company.
Yeah.
One example was we would at Office Depot with Title I schools, we would have the principal select an all-star teacher, someone who had done
Oh
just
yeah.
had an
Yeah.
incredible year, had been going above and beyond, and then we would sort of like do a full makeover of their personal classroom and office space with technology and desk and deluxe chairs and stuff. And it could have been something that we just kind of did, and it would have been wonderful done just kind of
Yeah.
subtly. But what we did, of course, I love telling a good story, was to create a create a good old fashioned,
Yeah.
cafeteria assembly and get
Yeah.
the news media out and get the superintendent out and get that teacher on stage and and then have
Yeah.
like a red cloth and you unveil, the
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product and give that teacher that moment of glory that
Yeah.
Lord knows that he or she deserves. And it ended up
100%.
being that the moment, in many ways, was more powerful to that teacher in that
100%.
school. And the donation was good; it was valuable. But that
Great.
moment, the way that it was sort of
Yeah.
story told and captured, oftentimes that teacher was on, the evening news, as it is a
Right.
big
And then that
story.
inspires, others to want to give back or do something good, because it's the feeling of like, oh gosh, there's good in our world and there's good in our community and I could do something. So I just think it's really important.
I think that's a really good point is you never really know the ripple effect of who you're going to
Yeah.
inspire, what ideas you're going to give to others that
Yeah.
couldn't be inspired or get those ideas if there wasn't the storytelling.
Yeah.
And again, tying it back to in kind, I mean, the visuals that come with that, right?
Yeah.
I think the employee pride who sees what they do every day as oftentimes a job, a good job at a job, and they sell whatever they do.
Yeah.
And then they see it in this magical setting where you're transforming lives, whether you're feeding the underserved or you're providing technology to the technologically under-resourced child, or you're
Yeah.
providing business attire clothing to the up and coming
Yeah.
um, low-income youth who's going to be able to be a star. And I think for your everyday employee to see the company that they dedicate their work life to, doing that with what they do in their day job can be absolutely magical. And
Yeah.
so I just first of all, Kelly, I know you and I could
Wait. I
talk
think,
shop.
wait. So wait, you've got a question. So you want to go? There's a question in the chat. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me see here. Hold on. Okay, let's see here. What are some, the question is, what are some strategies, ones that you use to help coordinate donors measure the impact on in-kind and cash giving? And so, I mean, I think you touched on that a little bit, but I know, first of all, it's critically important. And I would say there's no quick and easy way, especially if you work in an organization with multiple sites where product or services could be, or time, it could be donated through different departments, different buildings, different locations. I think you've got to do the hard work of aggregation. And I think, especially when it comes to time, right? You were talking about like, how do you put a monetary value on an executive's time? Well, there are ways, there are benchmarks and best practices that you, I'm sure, researched and applied.
Yeah.
And you don't want to overstate it. If anything, you want to maybe slightly understate it.
Yeah.
I know products are easy, right? Because they have a fair market sales value in services. But I think when it comes to, I think of, again, like a big auditorium. I've worked at companies where I've gotten to sort of have a huge deluxe space to offer up for like charitable galas and luncheons. Well, what would that cost out in the free market, right? Well, it might cost a nonprofit tens of thousands to rent a space. And so you can kind of get a sense of, wow, so we're saving that nonprofit X thousands of dollars through this spatial in kind. I would just say there's no easy way, and you've got to really do the rigorous homework. Would you say,
Yeah, so
Kelly?
my point was going to say, as far as the strategy, we don't ever come in guns blazing and say, this is the strategy and this is what you should do. And, we're not going to just cookie cutter, we're not a cookie cutter fit for some people. We really do put together a leadership team of individuals who have a very good understanding of what the company does and the direction that they want to go. And we help build that strategy with them. And so when we're talking about in kind, we kind of build that leadership team into that exercise and into that strategy to say how can we measure it that it's not going to be so taxing on the team and the individuals who are going to be assisting with that project. So that is a conversation that we just have with them.
And Kelly, I think it can be a really, I think, wonderful strategy for a nonprofit development professional to go to their corporate partner and say, hey, I think there's a story we could tell together here that could be really impactful. It wouldn't involve an additional monetary ask, something that you
Right.
already have. And we think that we could really be strategic in helping you bring this to
Yeah.
life in a very cool way.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
and it come with ideas, right? Do your homework on the organization and come with ideas of, hey, you know what? We think if we did this and this and this, it would probably be of this value, and
Right.
it's going to be very inspiring to us and to the community. So that'd be the last thing I would say is I really want to, and I know you feel the same way. I really want to encourage our nonprofit professionals to come up with some strategies around this and to be that proactive, really kind of an advisor to your corporate partners or prospective partners, and come with them with some really neat ideas that are pretty well fleshed out. And then be willing, of course, to be very
Right.
collaborative and roll up your hands with them. I don't want this conversation to end, Kelly, but the good thing is, you pick up my calls so we can
Okay.
have
Okay.
these
Happy to
conversations.
regroup. So good to see you though. And thanks
It's
for
so
having
good to
me.
see you. Oh my gosh. And hope we can have you again for another topic. There's so many
Happy to.
topics that we could go forever on just pro bono, and there's just so
Totally.
many things that we could and we will over time. I want to thank everybody. Strategic Philanthropy is an incredible organization that I imagine could be a great help to many of you out there. So please reach out to Kelly. I know she'll take your
Mm.
call probably more than she'll take mine. And then Mission Impact Strategies, we got, there's organizations, here in Florida and South Florida that can help organizations um, in ways that can help you grow and really tell your story. And I know that's passion work for you and I. So with that, we want to honor everyone's time. It is 12. It's lunchtime. Enjoy your lunch. Come see us. Come see us in a month for our next Impact Lab. And again, Kelly, thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day,
Have,
everybody.
have a great rest of your week, everyone.